First of all, I would like to thank Professor John Knight for taking the lead in organizing this forum. I think this forum focuses on several topics which, in my view, are very important for China's economic growth and development at the current stage. And also personally, I want to express my profound gratitude to John, because in my life, there are very, very, very rare cases that I do free riding. But in this case, John did all the work. And really, I joined as a co-organizer, but really, haven't done as much as I should. John did everything. Thank you, John. And also, I would like to thank Mr. Frank Wang, who, kindly sponsored this forum that provided the platform for us. And also thanks Professor Guy Liu from Brunel University, a longtime colleague of me, working on the Chinese economy. Today, my topic is about innovation policy in China. This is an issue now very hot in China. Always people come to me asking, now we see innovation everywhere, newspaper, in the media, and all the reports and the government policy guidelines. And everybody talk about this, but we still do not know how to innovate. How to innovate. And they are looking for answers, looking for solutions, looking for strategy. And today, I try to make a small contribution and sharing some of my thoughts on this topic. This is a policy paper, so you won't be able to see the formulas, Greek symbols, or data regressions that I usually do is on policy, but based on theory, based on empirical evidence. Why innovation now becomes such an important topic in China's economic growth? It has been neglected, or has not received the attention it deserves for a long time. China's economic growth since the reforms has been driven by the reforms in the agriculture sector, reforms in the state-owned sector, reforms of the price system, and also opening up, attract FDI and the firms going abroad, exporting and investment. And the innovation, it is until the late 1990s, the government has recognized that innovation should be one of the main drivers for economic growth of China, and also the fundamental, the very important one for long-term economic growth and the development for China. And at this stage, why it has some special importance is because innovation also is one of the drivers to pull a country out of the possible middle-income trap. This diagram actually shows the growth trajectory of South Korea, of Taiwan, of Malaysia, and of Japan. This curve is the growth, this is the income level of all these countries as a percentage of the US living standard, as a percentage of the US living standard. The highest one is Japan. We can see from the early 1960s to the mid-1970s, Japan has shown a fast catch-up process, and it's closing its gap with the United States. There are other two economies have done very well. These are South Korea and Taiwan. They have shown rapid catch-up process in the 1970s, 80s, and the 90s. However, we also can see another middle-income country, which in the 1960s, whose income level is even higher than South Korea and Taiwan. This is Malaysia. However, Malaysia has remained almost at the same level slightly increased its income and narrowed its gap with the US over 40 years. So some countries have, catch up, but some countries haven't, failed to do so. Why? What's the major differences between these countries and those failed to catch up, those still being trapped in the middle income trap? One of the main characteristics of Japan, Korea, and Taiwan is they have made much greater efforts in innovation, especially indigenous innovation capabilities building, than other middle-income countries like Malaysia. There are other middle-income countries like Brazil, like Philippines, like Thailand, like Indonesia. They are even lower than Malaysia. Malaysia is the best among that group, but still have not catch up. So this suggests that countries who innovate will be able to really move up to the high-income group. If you don't doing so, you will stay in the middle-income group, being trapped there. So in what follows in my talk, I will first discuss the theoretical framework that I will use to analyze the policies. The policies should not just come from random. There are rationales behind it for policy intervention. So I'll first discuss the theoretical framework, then briefly review the performance, the situation of innovation in China. And then based on the theory, based on China's performance, then discuss some policy recommendations. Finally, I would like to discuss the space for innovation policy in the 21st century. What we have learned in the textbooks, many belongs to the 60s, 40s, 70s, and 80s. Now we are in the 21st century. This week, China and EU had a big trade war on solar PV, and there are other things come. So in the 21st century, what is the space for innovation policy? I want to discuss this. First, I want to have a quick overview about the research on innovation policy in China. China is not short of research in innovation policy. If you do a search, you can find a lot of papers published in English, especially published in Chinese, and a lot of government commissioned reports on innovation policy, science, and technology policy in China. However, almost all of them are based on the national innovation system approach. This is a diagram showing us the national innovation system approach. This approach suggests that the innovation is a system work, and including several major players: the government, the business sector, and the public sector, like universities and the research institutions. And they interact with each other, and there are linkages with each other. And therefore, the performance depends on the actors and the linkages. Based on this idea, so many of the countries are strengthening the university-industry linkage, talking about PPP, government and private partnership. All of these are very nice ideas, very nice ideas. And also, this approach has some advantage. It's very easy for policymakers, for practitioners to understand. It's very easy to understand. There are several players, and they interact. The linkage very important. However, it does not explain how can I increase the capacity and innovativeness of all these actors, and how to strengthen the linkages. So this is the shortcoming. However, currently, most of the policy research in China is based on this approach. And China, I have to say, has done something good, especially in organizing all the innovation projects. Like all the national goal is then decomposed into several industry goals and the key subjects, key projects, key industries are identified, and then there are people organizing all this. So organization has been done very well, although people have not really figured out why should we doing so and how can we make each project effective and efficient, etc. And how to build the innovation capability of the country as a whole. So having recognized the gap in the literature, in the current research, in this paper, I will choose another approach, a different one. This is the capabilities approach. This capabilities approach suggests that national innovation capacity is determined, it's an outcome of the capabilities, incentives, and also institutional framework and the interplay of all these factors. The capabilities of a country will define the best can be achieved. Define the best can be achieved. Incentives will guide the use of the capabilities. Guide the use of the capabilities. And the framework is capabilities and incentives will work under the framework of institutions. So OECD in 1987 has a major publication called Structural Adjustment and Economic Performance. And they have a very, I think, very clear explanation about the relationship. It says the capabilities define the best that can be achieved, while the incentives guide the use of capabilities and indeed stimulate the expansion, renewal, and disappearance of the capabilities. Therefore, incentives determine the efficiency with which capabilities are used. And both incentives and capabilities operate within an institutional framework. Institutions set rules of the game as well as directly intervene in the play. They act to alter capabilities and change incentives. Institutions can alter capabilities and change incentives. And they can modify the behavior of people, of institutions, by changing attitudes and expectations. So these are the relationship between all these three elements and how they together determine the national innovation capabilities. And to make it more concrete, then I made some expansion based on Sanjay Lau's 1992 paper. First, capabilities include what? Capabilities first include financial, physical capital. How much we invest in innovation, how much we invest in R&D. Physical capital, I think that's no surprise. Human capital, also no surprise, because innovation, the key is about idea. Idea come from people, carried by people, created by people. So it's human capital. Also, I want to add the capacity of the state. In the innovation system approach we just have seen, the state government is one of the natural players in the national innovation system. Therefore, the capacity of the state to set the right policy, make the appropriate intervention, not over-intervene, not too much withdraw, it just act where it should act and when it should. That's the capacity, and also the technological effort. This technological effort in particular refers to the effort to innovate, to upgrade technology. So this is the capabilities elements, include all these four factors. Then let's look at incentives. There are macro incentives, including interest rate policy, exchange rate, physical policy, lower tax rate for innovation, relatively depreciated exchange rate, which encourages exports, means greater markets. Greater market means higher return for innovation. So all this will have impact on firms' motivation to innovate. Of course, interest rates too. If it's easier and cheaper to borrow, firms will more likely to innovate. Of course, there can be another side of the story is if it's too easier to survive, firms won't innovate. They don't need to innovate. So this is kind of two sides, a coin of two sides, but the push factor will be larger than the negative factor. Also, there are macro incentives. These macro incentives is within, I refer to those incentives within the firm, come from the governance, ownership structure, and human resource policies a firm set. You know, whether a firm rewards innovative employees, or the better is you innovate or not innovate, we treat you the same, which is like the iron ball, like China had, before the reforms. So these micro incentives also matters. And another very important incentives come from the product market, competition. Competition actually is a two-edged sword for innovation. According to the Schubitarian theory, more monopoly means firms more likely to get monopoly rents, and therefore they are more likely to innovate, because innovate they get more likely to get the rents back. However, also there are scholars like Jaworski argues that more competition push more innovation. Firms has to innovate in a competitive market so as to survive. So this is another stream of argument. And the recent research, also led by scholars in London Economic School and the IFS, they argue the relationship between competition and innovation is an inverted U-shape, follows inverted U-shape. So more competition leads to more innovation, but if you have over-innovation or over-competition, then firms very difficult to get the rents investment back from innovation. They are less likely to innovate. So this is argument about competition, but clearly competition plays a very important role here to incentivize innovation. Of course, factor market, like labor market, capital market, whether they are efficient, to provide the labor supply and the capital supply for innovation, also very important. So these are the incentives. Then institutions. They include legal institution, industrial institution, training institution, and technological institution. Legal institution in particular refers to, I think, IPR, intellectual property rights protection regime. So this, I think everybody are very familiar with about this, its importance. And the industrial institution refers to some industrial association, industrial like innovation network platform, which facilitates knowledge sharing and exchange and innovation within the industry. And the training institution in particular refers to some training institutions, including higher education and vocational education institutions, which provide training for the firms. In the private sector, some large firms have the capacity to provide training for employees, but many of the SMEs, the small firms, lack of this capacity, and some institutional help will help them to train their workers. Finally, technological institution. For example, some technology transaction market provide a platform and a channel for firms who need knowledge to acquire, find knowledge, and for firms who own a lot of patents to commercialize their knowledge. This exists in China, but they are not really functional well. I talked to people in China who manages the technology transaction market. It has been there since 1980s, but they said very often when we are close to the deal, firms find, better for them to do the transaction outside the market because they don't need to pay the fee. And that's why the transaction market does not really work in China. Now they are trying to making a lot of efforts to renew the role of these intermediaries, technology intermediaries. So these are the three elements, and of course now with the globalization, with internationalization of R&D, and the openness and the use of global resources, global talents, global knowledge really has become an opportunity for all the countries who open up their innovation system and their economic system. And the openness can affect capabilities if we allow foreign firms in, allow talents, migration, highly skilled migrants to come, strengthens capability. They will also provide incentives because more competition will force firms to innovate. And they may, have some direct or indirect impact on institutions. So this is the theoretical framework I will use for the analysis. Now, before the analysis, I want to, briefly overview China's performance in innovation. China's innovation, I think, in recent years has grown very fast, especially since mid-1990s. The investment in R&D, the growth is exponential. And also, this is in terms of inputs, R&D expenditure. If we look at outputs measured by patent granted, and we can see China also outperforms other 4 BRICS countries, outperforms India, Brazil, Russia, and South Africa. China does fairly well in the past 10 years. So these are good news. However, those are indicators, either single indicators of input and output. However, a country's innovation performance, especially its capability, is multifaceted and needs to be measured. A comprehensive measurement people have developed is using some indication system, a score system. And the European Commission has developed a system using 25 indicators, measuring the enablers, the firm activities in innovation, and outputs performance in innovation. They combine all these 25 indicators from human resource to financial resource to institution to firm innovation performance to the university's performance, etc., including the SMEs. And what is the score? What do we expect? Where is China in the world? Here is the answer. China is here. So Korea, the United States get the highest score. Japan also, very close to these two, very high. The EU 27 is slightly lower than Korea, US, and Japan, but this is average. Please note, this is the average of 27 EU countries. There are several star countries like Finland, Norway, Sweden, Germany. They are here. And the innovation score of China is around a quarter, 40% of that of South Korea and the US. So this is where China is, about half of that of Japan. This is China's innovation performance overall. This is an aggregate score. And looking at the gaps in individual areas, this is compare China to the EU 27 countries. All the scores, the positive scores means China doing better. The positive scores means China doing better. This is comparing the level Comparing the level, China only doing better than the EU in terms of number of doctoral graduates because of the population. So China only doing better than the EU in terms of doctoral graduates. Then in other aspects in terms of tertiary education proportion and publication, R&D expenditure by the public and the private sector and the patent and high-tech exports, etc. All lag behind. And the good news is, in terms of changes, China outperforms the EU in most of the areas. Of course, this is 2013 data. So EU has been in the crisis for several years. So their investment in R&D and their innovation activity may be affected by the crisis. So the changes in China, the advantage that China enjoys, we have to take into account. For EU, may be a short-term, temporary withdrawal. So this is, but I think China's catching up. We can see from those diagrams, China has increased very quickly in terms of R&D and other innovation activities. So this is the performance. And China also faces very urgently the issue of industrial upgrading. Looking at China's exports, these are the sectors showing China has the international competitive advantage. Most of the products come from the low-tech sector, nearly 60%. The medium tech is 12%. Of course, there are 17%, around 17% in the high-tech sector. But I want to say this 17% in the high-tech sector, we have to, watch very carefully, because in this 17% high-tech exports, more than 90% of China's high-tech exports are based on processing trade mode. So China imports the spare parts, assemble it with the unskilled labor in the special economic zone and re-export it. The value added and the skill content in China's assembly activity is very limited. It's very, very limited. And the most famous example is the iPhone example. Maybe many of you have heard about this story. The iPhone, the first generation of iPhone, was sold in the market at the price of 600. The cost is about 300. And among these 300 costs, we all know more than about 96% of the iPhones sold in the world are assembled in China. And what did China earn? $6.5 US. So out of this 300 cost, China earned $6.5. Therefore, the value added is really limited. And China faces an urgent task to upgrade its industrial structure and its capability, its technological capability. Then how can we do? What are the policy suggestions? The recommendations, one, regarding capabilities. I think China should continue to increase its investment in R&D. It has done very well in the past 10 years and should continue this. And especially increase the investment in basic research. Previously, more than 90%, 95% of the investment goes to development, not basic research. Now should increase the investment in basic research. The second is nurture the creativity. I think everybody knows this. I won't today spend more time on this because this deserves another presentation, another paper about how to nurture the creativity. I think this reform means the reform of the education system, not the university, but also from the nursery. How to reform the whole system. The third, I want to explain a bit more. It's about the utilization of international knowledge and talents to enhance China's innovation capacity. In terms of number of scientists and engineers, China is no short of. However, the star talents, star engineers and the scientists with high level of creativity, China is short of. We need this type of leaders in different disciplines. And this is not a nurture talents is not a short-term project, need long-term. In short-term, the solution will be to utilize international talents. Open up the system, attract not only returnees, Chinese scientists, engineers trained abroad, but also international talents no matter which country they come from, US, Europe, or Africa, everywhere. Use international talents and also the multinational companies to attract them to set up their laboratory in China. I remember for some time, there are headlines in China and India. These two countries are celebrating that multinationals are moving their labs to China and India and relocate. Of course, EU and the US are worried, very naturally. And the EU has commissioned several projects on this, want to find out what's the real story. And all the research found out there is no hollowing out effect. The core research, the lead research, the research of the highest sophistication and advancement are all remained in Europe. No hollowing out effect. So I think that's the truth China has to realize. Not celebrating too early. Oh, Microsoft set up a lab there, but we don't know what they are really doing there. So this is about the talent. Or, of course, SME and the private sector. These are the sector in China currently still being discriminated and short of resources. They are, in the EU, they are the most dynamic driving forces of innovation, but in China, they are under-resourced and underfunded and provide funding, information, and training for the private sector, for the SMEs. I think this is an area the government should tackle. Second is about incentives. Today, I may spend a bit more on this because I think this has been ignored for a long time. When we talk about innovation, how can we make China more innovative? Okay, yeah. People think about, we invest, we have money. Invest a lot of money, spend money, and that's why it leads to the problem about efficiency. Very low efficiency in China's innovation at the moment. So the first is about the reforms. I think this is a macro issue about reform of economic system, because currently there are state-owned sector, there are private sector, and there are sectors with free entry to everybody, but there are sectors with restrictions. Only the state firms or those who have good relationship with the government can enter. Therefore, many of the firms want to enter those sectors to get the higher rents, to real estate, to other sectors. And therefore, the resource has not been allocated efficiently within the economy and has not been relocated to the sectors which need resources, the innovative sector which urgently need resources. So we need to reform the system, increase competition, fair competition, so that resources can be allocated efficiently and being directed to the innovation sector. The second is about better use of human resource management practices. People haven't talked about this at all, but this is really very important. First is wage system. Now, the most clever kids in China, very likely they come to the UK. I know many of them going to the business school, they want to do finance. Going to the science and engineering sector, want to become a physicist. Think about that. in the natural science chemistry department, much less kids would like to go there because of job opportunity, because of the wages. So we need to reform the age system and give higher returns to scientists, engineers, and attract the best talent to the sector. Second is appraisal, reward, and promotion criteria in the university and in the research center and in the firms. Let's take university as an example. First, we should tell people quality is more important than quantity. Now people in China gradually recognize this. So they always want to publish in SSCI index journal, not other journal, because SSCI means quality. Anyway, this is too mechanical, but it's a good sign, moving to the right direction. And the reward, like the PhD student, now required to publish 2-3 papers in some very high quality journal within the 3 years of PhD, which is impossible in our system. It's impossible. So how to set the target, to allow major piece of research, give the rational length, 5 years, not 3 years. 3 paper means 1 paper, 1 year. It's impossible for high quality research. Set the reward system and the appraisal system appropriately. And also give the reasonable time span and also the promotion criteria. Whether you just publish paper enough, or for engineers, you have to patent it. This is different. If the policy stops at patent, the firms just, the faculty, the scientists just patent. They don't do any transfer and commercialization. If your assessment criteria include impact, include your knowledge transfer to the real economy, to the industrial sector, of course the faculty, the members, the scientists will do this. So change the appraisal system and the promotion system, like what we do in REF in the UK. We have impact. Every 5-7 years, there is an assessment. You only need 4 papers, and of course, high-quality papers. You don't waste resources to do low-quality things, and also impact is assessed. And also tolerance to failure. And also reform the funding system and appraisal methods, which I have discussed earlier, and also all this, I think, based on the culture. The culture rewards innovation, and also a culture take reputation and honesty seriously. If honesty is not really taken seriously, everybody can lie or make things up, and the opportunity cost, the cost of doing so is very low, then people do this. Now all this appraisal system, all these reforms means nothing. Because if you allow people lie and allow them to go on. So honesty and reputation need to be put at a high priority. So this is about the institutional development. I won't, because of time constraint, and also because IPR, intellectual property rights protection, everybody are very familiar. I don't spend much time on this. China is improving, have done a good job, but still need to do more. And also develop the intermediary markets, technology markets, to provide the platform for firms to acquire knowledge and to transfer knowledge. And the interplays. The interplay is very important. For a large country like China, really need coordination. Otherwise, different provinces, different regions, or different ministries have their own interest, and they say different things, or they do things repeatedly, or completely very differently contradict to each other. We need coordination, and this coordination need to set at a high level. My suggestion is we need an innovation working group at the high level, led by one of the prime minister or deputy prime minister to coordinate. Because innovation is not only science and technology. Innovation is about the whole system, from education to R&D, to the business sector about commercialization, but also needs the financial support, the tax system, the bank, the Ministry of Trade, all have to work together. And this coordination, like many of the things, we need a high-level working group to lead this and coordinate this. All the ministers should be members of this group, and the prime minister should lead this. And also, of course, I mentioned, need to communicate the right concept of innovation to the community and the economy. Innovation is not only science and technology. It's not only the business of the scientists. It's the whole system, from government to the salespeople. And of course, why coordination is important? Because you need balanced performance. In the EU, people find out the best countries in terms of innovation, they have very balanced performance. They are good on every aspect. If you have an aspect very weak, this is like the barrel principle. You know, all the water will leak out from your barrel if you have one side of the barrel is short. 5 is about openness, about integration into the global innovation system. In the 21st century, we cannot avoid this. And what China should do is to fully participate and make use of it, and using some non-conventional modes. People used to talk about imports, about inward FDI. Now we should talk about non-conventional modes. This includes collaborative innovation, include outward direct investment, merge and acquisition and direct invest in the UK, in the US, about the use of mobility of highly skilled people. These are the non-conventional modes we should use. And also actively participate in the international standard making and the international organizations. China needs such kind of scientists and engineers, not only good in their science and research, but also good at communication, organizing things, and take a lead in the international organizations. Fully participate. So if I highlight, I would like to say the reforms, fair competition and the resource allocation is one of the key. Second is use human resource management and funding resource management practices and incentives to strengthen incentives. Finally, use international knowledge. Before I conclude, I want to mention about the space for innovation policy in the 21st century. Before innovation policy, people talk about industrial policy. Industrial policy is now very infamous. People dislike it because of those winner-picking industrial policy. Now, this is relabeled and transformed. It's now called as innovation policy in many developed countries. In the US, they have innovation policy. In the UK, in Germany, in France, they all have innovation policy. They may do, something similar to the industrial policy, although they do not close their door. They do not do very clear winner-picking selective policy. So my suggestion to the Chinese government, first is use more pull policy rather than push policy. Because of WTO, you cannot force people to do anything. In the country, you have to create things and attract people, to pull people here, attract people here. Second, use more horizontal policy versus selective policy. Horizontal policy means those policy benefits everybody. Education policy, R&D policy, training policy, this horizontal policy. This policy complying with the WTO rule, nobody can complain with the country by invest a lot in education. But if you do winner picking, I pick solar PV industry and give a lot of subsidy, then you will have problem. So more horizontal versus selective. And more demand, more policy to encourage demand and create better environment rather than supply. I give you subsidy, you produce more products or innovation. And also, I think one thing very important for China is it needs to clarify and communicate correctly and thoroughly the meaning of indigenous innovation. Because indigenous innovation, this concept come out, many of the foreign friends that I know, they say, oh, China is going back to the closed door policy. You are going to do indigenous innovation. You are going to create things yourself. You are not going to need our technology, not going to communicate with others. But in fact, indigenous innovation means, to achieve something that you will enjoy or share. It's intellectual property rights, This can be achieved through you do in-housely or collaboratively or acquire and modification. So I think this concept should be communicated to the outside world correctly and thoroughly. Finally, just a reminder about policy. We talk a lot about policy. I don't mean policy government is a panacea, can save everybody. Stiglitz has made a statement. I think it's very good, and I want to use this also to conclude my presentation. Is governments also face information and incentive programs no less than does the private sector. We need to recognize both the limits and strengths of the market, as well as the strengths and the limits of the government intervention aimed at correcting market failures. That's all. Thank you.